Picture yourself standing at a wedding. Could be your buddy's big day, could be your niece's, could even be your grandkids. Everyone dressed up, smiling in that polished, picture-perfect way people do at events like this. The music's soft, the lighting's warm, and then you hear those familiar words exchanged for the millionth time in human history. "Till death do us part." It's a beautiful moment. It really is. But if you're honest with yourself, something stirs in the back of your mind. Not cynicism, not bitterness, just the quiet awareness that you've lived long enough to see what usually happens after those words fade. You've seen the statistics. You've watched supposedly perfect couples unravel behind closed doors. You've listened to friends whisper confessions they'd never dare say publicly. And what's interesting is this: more men today than at any other point in modern history are choosing to stay single. Not because they're incapable of connection, not because they're damaged or afraid, but because they've finally started recognizing a set of truths most people desperately avoid. That discomfort you feel when you witness a wedding, that's your mind telling you something your culture won't. We're told the same script from childhood. Find the one, build a family, settle down, ride into the sunset. But when you strip away that programming and apply simple first principles thinking, when you examine how modern relationships actually operate instead of how we romantically imagine they operate, you start noticing patterns, heavy patterns, dark ones. Patterns that explain why so many men are choosing the path society insists they should fear. Think about the last time someone brought up a man who never got married. Notice the language people default to: commitment issues, selfish, stuck in Peter Pan mode. We've built an entire vocabulary designed to shame men who don't follow the traditional partnership model. But what if the truth underneath is far less about fear and far more about clarity? I've spent years around innovators, engineers, designers, people who build things the world relies on, and there's this strange transformation I've seen over and over. A man enters a relationship bright, driven, full of momentum, and gradually, almost imperceptibly, the light dims. Not because love itself is harmful, love isn't the enemy, but because modern relationships have evolved into something fundamentally different from what they were built to be. They've become negotiations layered with expectations that often trade sovereignty for companionship, authenticity for approval, and freedom for stability. And that brings us to the first uncomfortable truth most people refuse to say out loud. For many men, modern relationships have quietly become financial traps. That sounds cold, unromantic, maybe even cynical, but let's actually look at the math. Strip away the emotional phrasing, the cultural pressure, the fear of growing old alone, and run the numbers the way you'd evaluate any other life-altering decision. When nearly half of marriages end in divorce, and when men, statistically, lose between 70 and 80% of their wealth in those divorces, you're no longer looking at a romantic partnership. You're looking at the single worst financial bet a man can make. Worse than a bad investment, worse than a failed business, worse than any risky venture, because unlike a failed business, you continue paying for the aftermath for years, sometimes decades. I've spoken with men, brilliant, accomplished men, who've been through this 2, even 3 times, each time believing the next marriage would be different, each time watching their savings evaporate, their homes slip away, their financial plans crumble. Then come the alimony obligations, child support numbers that exceed the actual cost of raising a child, attorney fees that swallow whatever remains, and these aren't rare exceptions. They're the average outcome. But here's the darker part most people avoid. Even marriages that work, that never end in divorce, still tend to create enormous financial burdens for men. From the moment the relationship becomes serious, your expenses explode. The engagement ring, minimum several thousand. The marketing tells you 2 or 3 months' salary is standard, as if you're buying entry into a social club. The wedding, tens of thousands more. Then comes the house because her apartment isn't suitable for a family. Then a safer car because hers isn't reliable enough. Then the lifestyle inflation that quietly creeps in with every shared decision, every upgrade, every expectation to provide a certain standard of living. And look, it's not that spending money is wrong. It's about opportunity cost. What could you have built instead with the years, the energy, the capital? How much further ahead could you be if your financial life wasn't tied to an ever-expanding set of expectations? I spoke with a man in his late 40s recently, someone who'd spent decades making compromises he couldn't even recognize were compromises. He said something that stuck with me. For the first time in my life, I'm alone with my thoughts, and I didn't realize how much of myself I'd been suppressing just to keep things stable. That's what financial freedom actually buys you. Not luxuries, not toys, time, space, the ability to invest in yourself, your knowledge, your physical health, your projects, your ambitions, without leakage. When you're not financing someone else's expectations, you can actually build something that compounds instead of drains. And here's something every builder understands. Creation requires resources. Focus requires resources. Growth requires resources. Modern relationships, the way they're structured now, consume resources faster than men can replenish them. The single man builds assets that grow. The partnered man often builds expenses that grow faster than his income. And when you start recognizing that dynamic, something else, something even more uncomfortable, comes into focus. Because the financial truth is only the beginning. It leads directly into the second dark truth men are waking up to. One that isn't about money at all, but about the expectations loaded onto them the moment they enter a relationship. And that financial reality leads straight into something even harder to swallow. Because once you see the numbers clearly, you begin noticing the structure sitting behind them. The expectations, the roles, the obligations no one admits are still in play. That brings us to the second dark truth men keep discovering, usually the hard way. Modern relationships are built on an unequal exchange where men are expected to give everything while receiving very little in return. You've probably noticed the pattern yourself. Women today often talk about empowerment, independence, equality, and that's fine. The world has changed, and more choices for everyone is usually a good thing. But there's this strange contradiction. While women embrace modern freedoms, the expectations placed on men haven't changed in 100 years. You're still expected to be the provider, even when the narrative says we're equals now. You pay for the dates, you initiate the plans, you absorb her emotional storms. You support her career, but if your job demands time or focus, suddenly you're emotionally unavailable. You're asked to be stoic and strong until she needs you to be soft and deeply empathetic. You must earn enough to make her feel secure, but be free enough to be available at all times. These aren't just mixed signals. They're incompatible. It's like being handed two different job descriptions and being told you'll be fired if you fail either one. And it's not just her, it's the ecosystem around her, the family expectations, the social circles, the obligations that gradually become your responsibilities. I once heard someone say, the best part about being single isn't just not dealing with her, it's not dealing with her family. Brutal, but honest. Because the moment you commit, suddenly you're juggling the emotional needs of multiple people you never chose. You attend events out of obligation. You spend money you wouldn't otherwise spend. You become emotional and financial support for an entire network that doesn't truly support you in return. And then, of course, dating apps poured gasoline on all of this. With endless options a swipe away, self-improvement becomes optional. Why develop emotional maturity when you can replace partners like a subscription service? Why cultivate depth when novelty delivers instant dopamine? This creates a marketplace where men are treated less like individuals and more like interchangeable utilities, providers, problem solvers, emotional shock absorbers. When someone has 200 potential backups in her pocket, why invest? Why compromise? Why work through challenges when starting over takes 30 seconds? And this is where it gets psychologically darker. Because when traditional structures collapse, new forms of manipulation replace them. The most effective form? Make someone believe they're failing at a game designed so they can never win. The standards shift, the rules change mid-match. You're told you're not supportive enough, not sensitive enough, not tough enough, not present enough. But the truth is, there's no enough. The goalposts move because the system functions by keeping you striving. And eventually, men look at this structure and recognize the pattern. The smartest move is to stop playing entirely. Opting out isn't cowardice, it's strategy. And that realization leads directly into the third dark truth. one most men don't truly understand until they've lived through it. Relationships today don't just demand resources, they demand your peace. And peace, for a man, might be one of the most valuable currencies he has. Think about what relationships require now. Daily emotional management, moods shifting by the hour, constant negotiations over things that should be simple, where to eat, how to spend weekends, which friends you're allowed to see. Infinite relationship talks that never resolve anything, just rehash the same patterns. Obligations that drain instead of recharge. Compromise on everything, how you dress, how late you stay up, how you use your time, what your goals look like. And somewhere in the middle of all that, you're expected to keep functioning at a high level at work while remaining permanently emotionally available at home. I've asked men a simple question. What's the first thing you think about when you wake up? A single man wakes up and asks, "What do I want to accomplish today?" A man in a stressful relationship wakes up and asks, "What problem do I need to manage today?" It only takes a few years of that before you start losing pieces of yourself. 10 years, 20, that's a lifetime spent firefighting. I know a man who's been single, truly single, for over 15 years, not because he couldn't find someone, but because he chose not to compromise his peace again. He told me, "The longer I'm alone, the more I realize how good life can actually be. I'm becoming the version of myself I always imagined." And he said it with a calmness I rarely see in married men. Notice that word, free. Because freedom isn't just financial, it's psychological, emotional, atmospheric. It's the ability to live a life without constant turbulence. Peace used to be normal, now it's a luxury. And when men finally experience how good life feels without constant negotiation, without emotional chaos, without mood management, they start recognizing something deeper, something even more unsettling. Because losing your peace is only the symptom. Underneath it is a much darker truth about what relationships slowly take from you. And that's where we go next. The fourth dark truth men eventually realize: modern relationships don't just cost you your time or your money, they cost you yourself. It doesn't happen all at once. It's never a dramatic moment where someone says, "Stop being you." No, it happens through 1,000 tiny cuts that accumulate over years. It starts with your music. Do we have to listen to this again? Then your friends. I don't like that group. Can we hang out with my friends instead? Then your hobbies. Don't you think you're spending a little too much time on that? And before you know it, even your long-term goals, your deepest ambitions, become a negotiation. Is that really practical? How will that impact us? Shouldn't we be focusing on something more secure? Suddenly, the version of you who once pursued things with fire and clarity becomes a softened, rounded, domesticated version designed to maintain harmony. Society celebrates this as maturity, as growth, as partnership. But what they're actually celebrating is the death of individuality, the taming of someone who once had edges, someone who once had a distinct identity, a unique worldview, a personal mission. And those pieces don't disappear dramatically. They fade quietly. Until one day, a man looks in the mirror and realizes he doesn't recognize the person staring back at him. Not because he changed naturally, but because he was slowly reshaped into something more convenient for someone else. I've watched this happen to some of the most talented people I know. Engineers who once lost themselves in problems that kept them up until sunrise, now rushing home to make dinner plans they didn't want. Entrepreneurs who once took bold risks, now playing small because one wrong move might destabilize the relationship. Artists who once created fearlessly, now filtering every idea through the question, "What will she think?" The world loses brilliance, not because men lack creativity, but because their lives become designed around minimizing friction instead of pursuing purpose. And here's the darker layer. Most people are terrified of authenticity, especially if they've already surrendered their own. When someone sees you being unapologetically yourself, it threatens them. It reminds them of what they gave up, what they compromised, what parts of themselves they abandoned to keep someone else happy. And because your authenticity exposes their sacrifice, they pressure you, sometimes subtly, sometimes aggressively, to live smaller, to dull your edges, to fit the same template they've been squeezed into. Misery loves company, and compromise even more so. The single man, by contrast, becomes more himself with time. His unique traits sharpen, his desires clarify, his identity solidifies. He grows in the direction of his actual nature, not the version others prefer. Meanwhile, the man constantly negotiating his identity becomes a diplomat, trained to avoid conflict, designed to maintain emotional equilibrium, shaped into someone convenient rather than someone real. I once asked a man who'd been married for over 25 years what he remembered most about his marriage. Not the connection, not the shared history, not the partnership. He paused for a long moment and said, "Relief, the relief when it ended." That's 26 years of compromise distilled into one word. If relief is the strongest memory, that tells you everything you need to know about what kind of life he lived inside that relationship. And that leads us to the fifth dark truth, a truth men rarely say out loud even to themselves. Modern relationships have become emotional labor camps, a place where you're responsible for her happiness, but she's not responsible for yours. Think about how this plays out in day-to-day life. If she's anxious, you need to soothe her. If she's insecure, you need to reassure her. If she's bored, you need to entertain her. If she's upset with her friends, her family, her boss, you're the emotional shock absorber. And this slowly becomes a full-time job, not officially, not verbally, but functionally. Her emotional world becomes your responsibility. Meanwhile, yours becomes an inconvenience. You express stress, she says you're being dramatic. You express sadness, she says she needs you to be strong. You express frustration, she accuses you of making it about yourself. Over time, men learn the same pattern. Their emotions create conflict, so they stop expressing them. And when you stop expressing your emotions long enough, you stop feeling them clearly. Emotional numbness sets in, and not because men are cold or disconnected, but because they've been conditioned to believe their inner world is a problem to be managed, not an experience to be lived. And here's the tragic irony. Many married men are lonelier than the single men they pity. How can someone be lonely in a relationship? Easy. You can share a house, a bed, a life with someone who never truly sees you, who doesn't know your actual inner life, who isn't interested in knowing because the real you might be inconvenient for the role she needs you to play. Single men may be alone, but their solitude belongs to them. Married men often live in a state of emotional starvation while being told they should feel grateful for companionship. And when you've spent years managing someone else's emotional landscape, your own mind begins to erode. Your focus disappears, your creativity dims, your ability to pursue deep work collapses, which leads directly into the sixth dark truth, the one that explains why so many men feel like they're falling behind in life without understanding why. This isn't philosophical or emotional, but brutally practical. Because once your identity is diluted and your emotional energy is drained, something essential begins to collapse. Your capacity for deep, sustained focus. The kind of focus that builds companies, solves impossible problems, writes books, composes music, innovates, creates, transforms. The kind of focus that defines a man's legacy. Modern relationships don't just drain your time, they fragment your attention. And attention is everything. It's the fuel for creation. Without it, nothing meaningful gets built. Think about what's expected today. You're supposed to text constantly throughout the day, even while working on demanding tasks. If you don't respond quickly enough, conflict brews. Why didn't you answer? Are you ignoring me? Do you even care? You're expected to manage jealousy triggered by interactions with people who've been in your life for years. You're expected to plan thoughtful dates, coordinate social calendars, be emotionally available on demand, and maintain a performance of constant reassurance. Even during moments when you desperately need silence and mental space, you're pulled into conversations that feel endless. And all of it eats away at the one thing you can't create more of, your cognitive bandwidth. Gradually, your mind becomes scattered, your thinking becomes fragmented, and that deep well of creativity that used to define you turns shallow. I've heard men describe it as a kind of slow mental suffocation. You're not drowning, you're evaporating. And the cruelest part? The more fragmented your mind becomes, the more you rely on external validation to feel stable. You start measuring your worth by someone else's approval. That's how creative men lose themselves. Not because they stopped caring about their goals, but because their attention, piece by piece, was consumed by relationship maintenance. Throughout history, many of the greatest minds in science, art, and engineering produced their breakthroughs in periods of solitude. Tesla working through nights alone with nothing but candlelight, Newton isolating himself for months, emerging with the foundations of calculus, Beethoven composing while wandering alone for hours, Da Vinci disappearing into his own world to follow curiosity wherever it led. They weren't dysfunctional. They weren't afraid of commitment. They understood something simple. Creation requires uninterrupted time and internal stillness. Modern relationships rarely allow either. A single man can slip into deep focus without apology. He can lose himself for hours, days, weeks, and in those spaces he builds. The man who is constantly pulled away by emotional demands, arguments, expectations, or fights over text message tone, he doesn't build. He maintains. He treads water. He stays exhausted. I know someone who ended a long-term relationship and spent 2 years completely alone. During that time, he accidentally created something that turned into high-value intellectual property. When I asked him how it happened, he laughed and said, "It didn't come from inspiration, it came from silence." When your attention belongs to you, new ideas emerge. When your attention is constantly borrowed, rented, or demanded, you become a shell. And that leads into the seventh dark truth, the one society uses to guilt-trip men back into relationships: the fear of dying alone. But here's the uncomfortable reality. Everyone dies alone. Married people die alone. People with children die alone. Death is a solitary experience. The question is not whether you'll die alone, but whether you will live alone inside a relationship where you're unseen, unheard, or unvalued. Most married men aren't afraid of dying alone. They're already experiencing a slow internal death, a death of passion, a death of identity, a death of purpose. They become providers, not partners. Emotional anchors, not individuals. Workhorses, not dreamers. ATM machines with a pulse. They are surrounded physically, but abandoned emotionally. But the single man, the man who chooses sovereignty, faces the end of his life knowing he lived on his own terms, that his achievements were his mistakes were his victories, his failures, his growth, all authentically his. I once spoke to a man in his mid-60s who never married, some by choice and some by circumstance, and when I asked if he regretted it, he said, "Not one bit. I lived my life, all of it." And there was no bitterness in his voice, only clarity. Solitude with purpose will always be better than companionship without respect. And when you zoom out, when you connect all 7 dark truths, you see the real choice in front of men today. It's a fork in the road, 2 competing philosophies. One path says, I need someone else to complete me, to validate me, to give my life meaning. The other path says, I am enough. I build my own foundation. I create my own meaning. One is a path of dependency. The other is a path of sovereignty, financial independence or financial servitude, peace of mind or endless stress, identity or domestication, focus or fragmentation, internal validation or external approval, authentic living or slow, silent dying. Men who choose to stay single aren't avoiding love, they're choosing autonomy, they're choosing respect, they're choosing clarity over illusion. Society will shame them for it. They'll be called selfish, immature, afraid of commitment, but that's the voice of people who need others to be just as compromised as they are. Your freedom highlights their sacrifice. Your peace exposes their chaos. Your authenticity reminds them of what they've abandoned. So they pressure you back into the system. But here's what all great innovators discover. The individual has always had to struggle not to be overwhelmed by the tribe. Society wants you manageable, predictable, domesticated. But the world has never been changed by domesticated men. These 7 dark reasons aren't flaws. They're survival instincts. They're the building blocks of sovereignty, financial clarity, emotional autonomy, identity, focus, inner stability, peace, and dignity. These are not the concerns of broken men. They're the priorities of men who know their worth. And you don't need someone to complete you. You only need the courage to become complete by yourself. Because if you ever do choose to let someone into your life, it won't be out of fear or pressure. It will be out of abundance, out of strength, out of genuine choice. If this conversation echoed something inside you, something you felt but never said, Then speak up in the comments. Your perspective might be the one another man needs to hear. And if you want to keep exploring the truths most people avoid, subscribe. We're just getting started. Stay sharp, stay authentic, stay free.